Hi, my name is Neil Churgan, and welcome to the Beertzinut, or Serious Brewing Beer Brewery on Kibbutz Ketura. Now, I know some of you have been here before, but some of you are new to the ride, so I thought I'd give you a little tour, and you can see what we're doing here, and also for those of you who have already visited, a few new things. For instance, if you look up on the roof, you can see we've installed solar panels. So we're going as green as possible, and the whole kibbutz is really improved in terms of its use of solar power, and we're really excited by that. Also, you probably remember this if you've been here before, and the brewery is about to do some major changes, which maybe you'll be part of. So, you know what? Why don't you come inside and see what's going on? This is the entrance to the brewery. We put on a nice sign here, and of course, I have to thank my wife, who used to work at the Arava Institute, Sharon Ben-Chaim, and of course, she would say hello to everyone who's already been on the ride because she knows everybody. So here's our malt room. So the malt room, of course, contains malt, and these are all the various different kinds of malts that we use to make beer. You guys are probably wondering what malt is, and that's usually how I start the story of beer. I mean, if you look closely, you might know the difference between this and just some other grain, but this is the backbone of what beer is made of. And it's kind of important to talk about because, I mean, when we think about malt, we think about beer, we don't necessarily think of the components that make it up. Of course, the number one component would be water, right? And everyone's got water. Well, that's not also true that everyone has the right kind of water. But malt actually is a secret that has come to us from a long, long time ago. Okay, I'm going to ask you, how many years have people been brewing beer? And you might say, okay, well, the Weinstoffen brewery has been around for almost 1,000 years. That's right. You can actually buy a beer today from a brewery that's been in continuous operation almost 1,000 years. That's pretty impressive. But beer goes back farther than that. I mean, we know that the Egyptians brewed beer because we see it in their hieroglyphics. We even have recipes for beer from Babylon and a receipt for beer that was purchased also in the area of Babylon. But I'm going to let you in on a little secret. The evidence of beer brewing is actually oldest in which country? No, it's Israel. Yeah, that's right. In Israel, there's evidence of brewing beer in the Rakefet Cave, which is in the Carmel Mountains. It's a bit surprising. Israel, with its highlands, is known for winemaking and wine producing. The grapes here are fantastic, and as you know, Israel has an excellent wine industry. But we've been brewing beer for a lot longer than that. 13,000 years ago, there was brewing in Israel. Yeah, a bit surprising to me too. And in the south here, of course, the southern part of Israel was under Egyptian control. So there had to be Egyptians brewing beer also in this region, although we haven't found the evidence yet. So what is malt? So as you can see also from here, malts are grains, and when we say malt, we're referring to barley. Barley, in principle, is the number one ingredient in all beers all over the world. This particular malt comes to us from Germany, from Bamberg, Germany, and the barley is malted. So what does that mean? So we ferment, we have to essentially germinate those seeds that come from the barley, and once they start sprouting, they're actually producing their own enzymes and sugars. At the point at which they produce sugars, we want to stop the process. By stopping the process with low heat over a long period of time, we get this. We get a pale colored barley, which is completely dry, just ready for us to leach out those sugars, which is already produced. But if we want to, we can also use a higher temperature and roast those grains, and that's how you get beers like Guinness, exactly, or other kinds of stouts. In fact, we have a new stout, which maybe we could virtually try at some point. In any event, this is the malting room, and all these grains we receive from overseas, but we crush them freshly right before our brew. So now let's come inside. I know it's a bit hot out there, and we'll go into the cool production facility. You know what? I think we're socially distanced enough. I'm going to take my mask off. And I just really wanted to show off my Beertzinut mask also. So, how are you guys doing during the pandemic? Everyone staying safe? First of all, and I'm going to try and say this at the end as well, thank you very much for participating. This is a real treat for us to have and host you guys. In past years, of course, we're actually able to give you a glass of our beer on site and discuss with you all the wonders of biking and brewing and beer. But now we'll have to do it virtually. And I'll remind you now that there's a Q&A at the end of the session. So that's, as we talked about the malt is the base of the beer. And there's another base that I want to talk about, and that's sort of what is the base of this business? Because in addition to producing a beer, we live on a kibbutz. And kibbutz and industry sometimes go hand in hand, and I know there are a lot of people who have questions about how that kind of thing works. So we're going to get back to the beer in a minute, but I kind of want to talk about the start of Beertzinut. So, I mean, if we just take a quick glance up here, we can see there's all kinds of beers and products that we've started to work with. And yet, how did that all come about? So let's sort of get in our time machine and go back about 10 years. Sort of in my life, I had been working in different places. I'd been in charge of the food on the kibbutz. I'd been in charge of the food at the guest house. And I myself was interested in baking, and I still do a lot of baking, mostly challah for Friday nights, and specialty challahs we do for bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs and all kinds of special events. I used to play around with the different grains that we had. And then a number of years back, a good friend of mine, Yoni, with his wife, Tali, who you also know from the bike ride, of course, moved to the kibbutz. And Yoni and Tali had been CSA farmers. Now, for those of you who don't know what CSA is, that's community supported alcohol. Oh, no, sorry, agriculture. Right, it's agriculture. But for me, it could be alcohol. So community supported agriculture is when the participants essentially buy a sharehold of the crop that's about to be grown, and then every week when there's actually what to pick, they come in and pick up their basket, and sometimes people actually participate in it, sort of like we have a Toranut or a rotating responsibility for different things. They would have that too. Well, when they moved to the kibbutz, Yoni kept talking about how he used to brew beer with a good friend of his, and that we should brew beer, and we should brew beer, we should do that. Well, in our family, nothing really happens until someone motivates it. So my wife bought me a home brewing kit. Yep, she bought it for our anniversary. And it's called the American Beer Machine. You basically poured a powder into water and another powder in there, which was the yeast, and it brewed beer. And actually, you know what? It was pretty good. But we knew that that wasn't really brewing and that there was more to it. So Yoni and I investigated what we would need to get materials here in Israel. He actually brought over some of the things that he had in the States. And meanwhile, another couple had moved to the kibbutz. That was Richard and Lila. Lila's actually grew up on the kibbutz, and Richard had been a volunteer, but he had studied brewing, and he brought some of his equipment. So the three of us started brewing homebrew and gaining experience through homebrew. Now, those of you who homebrew will probably already understand this phenomenon, but once you start homebrewing, all of a sudden you have friends. Like all of a sudden you have all these people say, okay, so what did you brew most recently? What's new? And in fact, to encourage this, because we were getting a lot of feedback about our beers, not always good, but mostly positive. So we would stand in the dining room on Friday afternoons, and someone wanted a beer, they could write down how many beers they took, and we would charge an account. And whenever I bought new material, I would charge that account. And so we essentially kept a balance. Again, keep in mind on a kibbutz, I can't start my own business privately. I'm not allowed to do any kind of private business. So this all has to be sanctioned by the authorities of the kibbutz. At this point, it was all very much sort of an in-house system. But think about that. For 2 or 3 years, we would brew beers, and we could get feedback from essentially a enslaved audience. Okay, maybe not enslaved isn't the right word, but a pretty much captive audience that was very fond of something being local. And from that, the next question was, how do we take that same bottle of beer, right, and then put it on a label and put it in, let's say, the guest house, because that would be the next logical place. Our guest house specializes in providing education and experiences which are local. I don't know if it's already been mentioned, but one of the cool things they did, now keep in mind this is the year of the pandemic, and so everyone was searching for experiences people could have in the open. So they devised the most interesting and unique kind of activity. They were inviting people to come and hunt, not to actually hunt, but to look for scorpions in the desert. Now they were doing this at night. It's out in the open air, so there's all kinds of spacing, and using ultraviolet flashlights to find these scorpions. And they, of course, every time you go out, you can find scorpions. And how exciting is that? It's sort of something that's a little spooky, a little scary, and of course it's not really dangerous because you have these flashlights. So inspired by the fact that our guest houses are trying to provide more local, so we wanted to try and provide something that was local from here. With our interest in brewing, we figured there was a way to do that. Now, setting up a brewery, it takes resources, and resources, you know, really translate into money. So before going to the kibbutz and asking them for a big layout for equipment and such, we proposed something else. We would open a business, and that business would then take its recipes to a brewer who is already licensed, and we would contract those beers out, receive the beers completely unlabeled. We would label them ourselves with our own brand, and then we would market it as our own. That's something that's very acceptable, certainly in the United States, but also here in Israel. It's been done quite a bit. And we did this for about 2 or 3 years. And I think we were successful. We were able to sell everything we produced. It's not really a money-making business, but it's essentially a way to survey the market without many pocket expenses, because we were able to bring in the income from the beer that we sold from those breweries. And seeing that we actually had a statement to say in the beer industry propelled us further on. Now, another thing you might remember if you visited the kibbutz, and I'll explain also for the new people, is that one of the big surprising industries that we have is a biotech called Alga Technologies. Alga Technologies produces an antioxidant which is based on organic material, on an algae called Haemococcus pluvialis. I know that's a mouthful, but if you just listen to the beginning part, hemo, right? Hematology, that's blood, right? The color of the algae is a sharp red color when it's in bloom. Now, if you think about any of you, I know there's some vegetarians out there, but those of you who might eat salmon, or have seen salmon or lox, so you know it has a lovely pinkish hue. Well, where do you think the fish get that pinkish hue? They get it from eating the algae. And the algae has this antioxidant in it, which is a very important part of our physical system that keep us and maintain us. And so that's used as a nutraceutical, especially in the Far East. So we are actually growing the algae and producing the antioxidant here on the kibbutz. The business itself was growing so much it wanted to expand, and it expanded, and we as a kibbutz have decided to sell off our dairy. We had a cow shed here, as well as a quota. In Israel, things operate off a quota, and we were able to sell that off and had some money in hand. So with that money in hand, of course, most of it went into savings so that we would have future investment into a business, but some of it went into entrepreneurs. And there were 3 entrepreneurs which were granted some of this money. There's a bakery which is next door to us. There's a jeweler. She markets her products in Israel and also abroad. And of course, this place as well. So the foundations of the building and everything came from the sales of those cows and the quota that went with them, and the desire for the kibbutz to look for new industries. Now, this is a long-term project. So we started off small. What we're about to see is only 48 square meters. But the kibbutz has already put in its request to invest in approximately doubling that. We're on the road to investing when the coronavirus pandemic broke out. In fact, I'll tell you, this is actually a kind of a personal story, but as sort of part of that decision to expand the brewery, I went to a beer conference. And I actually just went as a sort of a vacation. Figured, hey, let's go to Italy. Let's go to Rimini. It's a lovely place to go. And it's right next to San Marino on the Adriatic coast. But of course, I would fly out from here, from the new Ramon airport, 42 euro round trip, like what a great deal. And you fly into Bergamo, which is right next to Milan. Went to the beer conference, had a great time, went to San Marino and visited some breweries there. On the way back, it happened to be Fashion Week, so I went into Milan, go to the Duomo and see all kinds of people. There was a game that night from Champions League soccer. It was the Bergamo team Atalanta playing in Milan against a Spanish team from Valencia, and the Valencia fans were out and cheering. And I thought, wow, how lovely, how colorful, amazing. I didn't have a ticket to the game, but I did watch the game at a restaurant in Bergamo with and they had won. They, in fact, creamed the other team and made some amazing goals. And when I came back, we learned all about Corona. And those same fans that were in front of the Duomo and their friends were the ones that brought the coronavirus back to Spain. Everything fell apart after that. San Marino was the country with the most deaths per capita. And as you probably well know, northern Italy was also hit very hard, and everyone was still feeling the effects. And that sort of affected me and made me want to brew beer. I know that sounds weird, but that's sort of the way I paint my canvas. So I'm going to tell you about that beer, and then we'll get to some of the other beers. Well, this is the beer that I was inspired to brew. I had encountered, when I was at the beer conference, a new hop that had come out called Sabro, which is very popular now, and sort of gives almost like a coconut kind of twang to it. Very, very American in terms of where it's grown and the styles and the sort of the previous ancestry of the hop itself comes from America. But if you look at the label, it's sort of this tropical, right? So the name of the beer, which you won't be able to see on the camera, but is Finav, F-I-N-A-V, Finav. I won't tell you what the F is, but the I-N-A-V stands for I Need a Vacation. So this is my I Need a Vacation beer. And that is sort of a way of introducing the brewery. So the brewery, the name of it is Beertzinut. Beertzinut is a Hebrew word which means it's sort of a bastardization or misspelling of the word Beertzinut, which is serious. So we're serious, but we have a little bit of a wink in there too. We love to play with names, Beertzinut itself or Finav, and there's a few other beers which we'll talk about as well. So we've been brewing beers now in this facility for 3 years. We market from Eilat to Tel Aviv, more or less, although we recently opened up a place that's selling our beers in Elkanah, which is a little closer to Ariel. And we, in Jerusalem, there's a place, and mostly the craft beer points from those places farther on south. We also tend to be in places which are a little bit more boutique and where you can get other craft products. So let's go back to the beer for a second. We talked about malt. What are some of the other ingredients? Well, one of the other ingredients we have is hops. Now hops, you guys know what hops are? So I'll tell you what hops are. Although I hear a couple people out there who do know, so good for you. So hops are not what kangaroos and bunnies do. No. Hops is a very important part of beer, and it comes from a plant. In fact, let's try to imagine a different plant that grows and is used for, recreational purposes, and it's mostly used with the flowers. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Well, that's actually a kissing cousin to the cannabis. So the hop, it doesn't produce THC or CBD, but it produces something called alpha acids. And those alpha acids are important for two reasons. One is the hops provides the bittering agent for beer. Now we know beer, if I take we talked about the sugars in the malt, and I put them into a liquid form, so I have this sugary, sweet syrup, basically. In Hebrew, by the way, that's called tirosh, which would be the same thing you would call something that you squeeze grapes and get juice from. In English, grapes is must, and in English, the beer syrup is called wort. Just so you know all these fun things for the next trivia contest, right? So the hops are actually, we want them to bitter. Now, hops don't naturally come bittered. They come with a special, these alpha acids in it, which under some sort of catalyst will actually turn them into a bittering agent. And what that catalyst is heat. So brewing the syrup with the hops in it actually activates the bittering agent, which is why a brewery is called a brewery, right? We don't really think about it. Like beer is a cold beverage, so why is it brewed? Well, it's brewed specifically for this stage of the process. Once I leach out those sugars, create the sugary syrup, I add the bittering agent. Now, but there's another part of the hops which is also very key, and that is that same alpha acid provides shelf life, a longer shelf life, which sort of gets us back to those ancient brewers. When they started brewing beer, one of the things, why was brewing beer essential to the start of civilization, right? There's probably a discussion going on whether baking bread or that industry came first or whether the brewing industry came first. But I think it's clear that brewing is even more of an impetus to advancements in civilization. And I know I've jumped a distance off, but I'll explain. Okay, so let's say we take grains, the barley or wheat, and we bake them into bread. Well, how long can I eat for? I could eat for 2 days, 3 days before that bread goes bad, and then I'd have to start a new batch, right? With beer and spirits, anytime there's fermentation involved, I actually extend that shelf life. Beer itself, again, is a food. It's a food that I then use to preserve for long-term storage. And having that long-term storage gives me food security. Food security will allow me then to be able to develop other aspects of my life, which of course include art or government and philosophy and things like that, which are important building blocks, and religion, which are important building blocks of civilization, at least as we see it today. So I know it's being a little pompous, but the truth is, beer is pretty much responsible for civilization. Yeah! So have a beer and, and advance civilization. No, so that hops attitude, for instance, will come true in another kind of beer, which is sometimes referred to in Israel or other countries as IPA. IPA, have you ever heard that? I hadn't heard it before, but a lot of people say IPA, but what they really mean is an IPA. But we'll get to our IPA in 1 second. So just so you know, we also have kind of fun at the brewery by putting up all kinds of fun signs. So beer is made from hops. Hops are plants, so beer is a type of salad. So this is actually a nod not only to our fun with beer, but to one of my kids. So I don't have children, but I have boys. Yes, you're allowed to laugh. So the youngest is in the Army, but the rest have finished with the Army. And one, in fact, moved to Hawaii. But he divides the world into 2 realms, of the food world into 2 realms. One is red meat, which is he calls food, and then everything else, which is salad. So soup would be a floating salad, or casserole would be a baked salad. So you see where that's going. So beer for him is also a salad. So if he's having a steak and a beer, then he's making his mother happy by having salad. A long story, which means nothing, but I thought it'd be interesting. And so I want to talk about our IPA. So I'm going to just grab that. Da-da-da-dum. So this is our gold medal winner European Beer Challenge of 2019. This is a beer, it's called Shlishiya, or 3-way, which I know sounds a little racy, but it is, and it's kind of fun. But it's made with 3 different kinds of hops. So the world of hops, if I just say hops, it's kind of like saying spiders. Like there's a zillion kind of spiders in the world. I don't put spiders in beer, by the way. That was not meant to be the connection. But so hops have all kinds of different varietal strains, and even as I'm speaking, there's probably 5 more that are being released to some sort of beer industry, because that's just how crazy the hop world is right now, which is a good thing and also a confusing thing if you're a customer. But specifically, different countries that grow hops, they have to have cold climates, especially a frost in the winter. So although Israel is technically not a candidate, we live on a kibbutz with Dr. Soloway, and she can grow pretty much anything, including 2,000-year-old Judean dates. So she can also grow hops. Wink, wink, maybe next year you'll have a beer brewed with Ketura hops, which have already had flowers this year. So hashtag, spoiler alert, whatever you want to call that, look for us next year. This has 3 different Pacific Northwest hops. Centennial, Cascade, and Citra, if anyone's taking notes. You might have noticed they all begin with the letter C, which my last name, Churgan, happens to start with. Absolutely no connection, but I thought it was a fun fact. That's a bonus fact. And then, so those 3 hops, in my opinion, kind of sing together. They have a certain verve, also in the flavor of the beer, but most importantly for me, on the nose. So when we pour a beer, right, we're tasting it very much the same way we might taste a wine. We're looking at the color, we're giving a little bit of a nose to it, we're getting our initial reactions through our olfactory, and then we're taking a swig and coating the mouth and getting all the different receptors to pick up on everything. And so we're getting that mingling of those hops and a very gentle sort of parsing of different kinds of malts. But mostly this is driven by the hops itself. So just a word for people who might have been in the closet the last 20 years and don't know what an IPA is. I'm kidding. There are people who just have no, they don't care. They just want a beer. So an IPA, though, is a very important part of the craft beer culture, certainly in America, but to some extent also in Israel. It's definitely the most important brand of any brewery that is considered as its craft brewer. And there's a connection to Israel, which I'll try and remember to add to it as well. So how was the IPA started? By the name, you might have thought that it was an Indian pale ale, but this is India Pale Ale. It's actually a British, colonial British beer that was then brewed in England, but sent to India. So you have 2 kind of challenges that go along with brewing an IPA. One, of course, is just the distance. Remember, these ships were powered by sails, and so the distance, the duration of the voyage was quite long. But the most important challenge is that England far north, and India, of course, on the other side of the equator and through the tropics. So the difference in temperature was quite astounding. So this had to be a beer that could survive all that and not explode on board. So to survive the fact that it wouldn't explode, these IPAs were set to rest for about 9 months to make sure there were no residual sugars for them to ferment out. And then they were made with a lot of hops. Remember, we said hops is a preservative. And so that actual preservative. But making a super bitter beer was not very fun to drink. So they would add a lot of malt. So it was a very heavy beer with a lot of malt character. When the Americans took it over in, let's say, the early 80s, they heard a lot of hops. And they sort of went with that. Now, the basic kind of hop that was available to them was the Cascade hop, which of course comes from the Cascade. The name of the hop comes from the Cascade Mountains. Most of the hop names are, like a lot of foods, are geographically based. And so that brought a character of beer that just wasn't encountered before. And now it became actually sort of the basis for an IPA. One of the other things that you'll find now that with IPAs is that they come in all different sort of shapes, flavors. We even have a black IPA. So it's a pale ale, which is black, which is kind of, doesn't make any sense. But the flavor-wise, it does sort of, one does sort of mimics the other. So, so that's our IPA, and we're very happy that it won that gold medal. We had actually 2 other medal winners. Our Cool Majul, which is our smoked date ale, won a gold, and that black IPA, which I just mentioned, also took a silver medal in the same competition. But really the beer that we should be talking about is a beer that we call now Tal Hamidbar, and I'll translate that name. So Tal is dew, like in the morning you have dew on the grass and stuff like that. But this is Tal Hamidbar, which is the desert dew. So there's a little secret in there about the name, but let's talk about the beer first, and then we'll talk about the name. So when we were first asked to produce a beer by the Arava Institute and Chazon, the concept was that the day before traveling to Eilat, of course, the bike ride stops here at Ketura, which makes perfect sense. You want to meet the people who are involved with the Institute, you want to meet the students themselves, and it's really just a lovely place to be. And I think we do it pretty good with hospitality. But as you're riding in, right, you're coming up that hill to the reception, and you have a cold beer waiting for you. I mean, trust me, that's just the perfect way to end a bike ride, especially one that just came out of Mitzpeh Ramon and all the way through beautiful landscapes of the desert, and now you're rolling into a place which is essentially opening its arms and saying, welcome, you've landed. And so this is a kind of landing beer. Now, the bike ride, again, for the people who've ridden, you already know this, but the new people, I mean, there's just such a variety of people that come to support the whole idea here of the Arava Institute and Chazon, that you have people from different walks of life, different countries, of course, but with some commonality as well. And so we had to sort of search for that commonality to come up with a beer that we thought would sort of satisfy the palate. So we had first considered a wheat beer, but wheat beers sort of work out a niche of people that don't like wheat beers. And we certainly didn't want to do something that was a little too alcoholic, because we didn't want people not being able to get up for the next day of bike riding. But we did come up with this. This is sort of a hybrid between a pale ale and a wheat beer, but there's also a little bit of rye in here. And that rye provides sort of a dry character on the end of the palate. So when you finish that sip, it sort of makes you want to drink more. And of course, what do you need to do after a long bike ride? Rehydrate. So this is our rehydration beer. Now, many of you might remember, years and years ago, we called this something else. We called it root beer, R-O-U-T-E, or route beer, right? Sort of a play on words. And that was the beer for the way. Well, after that, it was so successful that we came out with a beer called Chita V'chetzi, or wheat and a half. And then we renamed the beer with a very, very slight modification of the recipe to essentially honor someone who had been in charge of the bike ride. That's right, Tali, who used to be in charge of the bike ride, who's married to Yoni, who works here. So this is named for her, Tal Hamidbar. And a little more trivia is Tali's name is Tal. That's right. So you called her Tali, I call her Tali, but her actual name is Tal. So, l'chaim. One of the other things that is new to the brewery this year is a website. We have a great website, so Beertzinut.com, where we're also starting to sell our products online. Of course, with social distancing and all kinds of changes in the economy, delivery of beer has become very important to the beer drinking industry. Many of our clients are actually already doing that. And so we're supplying suppliers who send out beer, but we are also oftentimes, people come to us for our own products, which is a lot of fun. Currently, we do not market outside of Israel because of all kinds of different shipping regulations, but I please do encourage you to visit the website and check out the store, because there are going to be products there which you can purchase. Mostly beer to be delivered in Israel and/or hard products. So for instance, I don't know if we'll be able to market this abroad, but this landed here yesterday. This is our new Beertzinut glass, which is also emblazoned with the emblem of Kibbutz Ketura on the other side. And it is, trust me, heavy enough to use as a great device for giving as a present, filling it, of course, with any beverage of your choice, whether it be beer or anything else. I mean, I'd probably give one of these to my wife because she loves Jelly Belly candies and fill them up. But yeah, it's quite a nice little container here. And like I said, it's quite heavy and will last for a long time. We also have our special bottle openers, and but more importantly, it's just to see what's going on here, so that when you do come to visit, which is really my dream, is that you can come here in person and we can share a beer together, which is really what I want to get at right now. And I know right now it's a very difficult time for people to travel. But whether you're coming for the next bike ride, which I encourage you to do, or whether you're coming on some kind of other trip to Israel, please visit Kibbutz Ketura. Please visit the Arava Institute. And don't forget to join me for a great Beertzinut beer. I'm going to be here to take questions right after, so stay till the end of the video, and I'll be talking to you soon. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye. Shalom.